In October of 2013, 28-year-old biologist Lucas Warren set out on a short solo hike in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. He was supposed to return in 3 days. His car was found in a parking lot near the trailhead. His tent was found scattered in the foggy forest, and Warren himself was missing. The search lasted a week, but there were no traces. 5 years later, an eagle's nest was found at the top of an old pine tree, and a human skull was found among the branches. Lucas Warren, a 28-year-old biology graduate student at the University of Boulder, went on a short expedition to a remote part of the park, an area that local rangers call Black Bear Creek Canyon. This place is not marked on tourist maps: a dense spruce forest, steep slopes, narrow canyons with almost no sun. Tourists are not allowed there, but for Lucas, this area was perfect. It was there, according to old herbaria, that the rare species of mosses he was researching for his dissertation grew. In the pre-dawn darkness, he loaded his gear into his old SUV: a tent, a sleeping bag, a field camera, and airtight containers for the samples. Anna, his wife, stood by the door holding a mug of coffee. She was used to these trips and did not try to dissuade him. Lucas promised to return on Sunday evening. At 12 o'clock in the afternoon, his security camera at the park station recorded Warren's car pulling into the parking lot at the trailhead of Black Bear. A few minutes later, he wrote his name in the visitor log and made a note. Return, 3 days. 1. Goal is field specimens. The next morning at 8:40, Anna received a short message from him. Reach the camp. The fog is incredible. Tomorrow I will go higher if there is a signal. I love you. That was the last trace of his life. When he didn't call on Monday, Anna thought at first that he was just delayed. But on Tuesday, she contacted the Ranger Service. The search operation began the same day. Experienced rescuers, dog handlers, and volunteers. The weather in the mountains quickly deteriorated. Thick fog was sliding down from the peaks, and the first snow fell at night. The first to be found was the car. It was parked in a parking lot, locked with a map, a camera, a notebook, and an unopened bottle of water inside. There were no signs of a struggle or damage near the car. A few hours later, about a mile from the parking lot, the searchers came across his camp. The tent was half dismantled, the backpack was open, and his belongings were scattered. Everything looked as if the man was about to continue on his way, but something suddenly stopped him. Rescuers examined the surrounding trails, gorges, and stream beds. The dogs picked up the trail several times, but lost it several hundred yards away, as if it had vanished into thin air. There were no shoe prints, no broken branches, no pieces of cloth, nothing to indicate that he had left the camp in a particular direction. On the third day of the search, team leader Jake Brady reported that the slopes had become dangerous. Rocks were falling off and temperatures were dropping below freezing. The operation continued for 3 more days, but to no avail. The only thing that raised questions was the trail of a flashlight seen from a helicopter on Friday night. The source of the light could not be determined. When they got there, they found nothing. The Park Service stopped active searching a week later. The report stated, possible fall into a mountain gorge or hypothermia. The body was not found. The case was classified as a missing person. Anna Warren could not accept this. She refused to leave Boulder and spent several weeks traveling the forest roads on her own. She described the place as a foreign territory where sound disappears in the fog. Locals said that Black Bear Creek was not the best place to spend the night. Even the navigator's signal is often lost in that gorge, and compasses behave unpredictably. The last person to see Lucas alive was the driver of a tour bus coming down the pass that morning. He told police that he saw a man in a green jacket standing by a broken tree on the side of the road, looking down into the fog. This matched Warren's description. After that, there was silence. There were no witnesses, no evidence. Only an entry in the visitor's log and a short message that Anna now read every night. A month later, she went to the police again, but the investigation was officially closed. The only line in the final document sounded cold. Probable disappearance during weather conditions that made a search impossible. Black Bear Creek was empty again. Winter winds covered it with snow, and fog once again enveloped the slopes. And somewhere among these stones remained the trace of a man who was searched for but never found. 2014 to 2017. Anna Warren remained in the town of Estes Park, a few miles from the entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park. Her house stood on the outskirts of the town, overlooking the dark ridges where her husband was last seen. Every morning, she would go out on the porch with a cup of coffee and look out to where Lucas had gone. She could not accept the official status of missing. Every few months, Anna would gather small search parties of local volunteers and rangers. They would hike the trails around Black Bear Creek Canyon, the very spot where his camp once stood. Each hike ended the same way: emptiness, silence, and new questions. In the spring of 2015, Anna began studying old maps of the park. She found a copy of a 19th century report in the Boulder Library that mentioned a Hawthorne settlement that existed near the same canyon. The document stated that in the first years of colonization, the entire family disappeared without a trace. Since then, the place has been nicknamed the Valley of the Never Returners by foresters. The locals were reluctant to talk about those mountains. Hunters who spent the night near Black Bear Creek recalled hearing strange sounds, as if someone was humming something in the fog. Some heard soft footsteps, although no one was around. The Park Service explained it as a natural phenomenon, the wind passing through the gorges. But the older residents had a different opinion. The mountain takes its toll. Anna tried to stick to the facts, not to believe the legends, but sometimes when she followed the trail of the searchers and the fog was closing in, she had a strange feeling that someone was nearby. She wrote down every detail in her notebook: dates, directions, coordinates, even the height of the trees among which Lucas's tent stood. In early 2016, when the official investigation was finally frozen, Anna turned to a private detective. He was a former ranger named Mark Sanderson, a gray-haired man who knew Colorado's parks better than most locals. He agreed to help for a minimal fee. "I'm not looking for money, I'm looking for answers," he told her during their first meeting. Sanderson began by reviewing all the official case files. He was alarmed by one detail. The searchers' report did not mention analyzing soil samples near the camp. This meant that possible traces could have been lost. They decided to follow the same route. On July 23, 2016, they took the trail leading to the site of Lucas's camp. After 2 hours of walking, they reached the clearing where the tent once stood. The grass had grown back, but the imprint of the bedding was still there, a dark, circle-shaped spot. 15 yards away, Sanderson found a piece of wood that looked unusual. It was a small statue, roughly carved with a knife, a bird with unnaturally long legs. The eyes were marked with deep cuts, and the wings were open, as if in flight. Anna thought it was a child's toy or some kind of talisman. The detective was immediately alerted. "This is not a random thing. People leave such symbols when they want to be seen," he said. They took a picture of the find, carefully wrapped it in plastic, and took it to the city police station. The police were indifferent to this. The report stated that the item has no evidentiary value. But for Anna, it was a sign, the first after 3 years of silence. She spent the next month searching for information about the symbolism. In the old university archives, she found a reference to the totem figures of the Ute Indian tribe who lived in these lands. They believed that birds were intermediaries between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The figure of the marsh harrier, a bird that, according to legend, accompanied souls into the fog, was particularly special. The neighbors looked at her as if she were crazy. But each new piece of information only strengthened her conviction that Lucas was not just lost. She began to collect testimonies from hunters and tourists who had been in the area. One of them, an old man from the town of Lyons, said he had seen a shadow moving between the trees in the fog. It didn't walk, he said, it floated. All of these stories sounded like nonsense, but each had one thing in common. People were talking about the same place, a canyon near an old gorge where sound disappears. In the fall of 2017, Anna went there alone again. Her friend tried to dissuade her, but she said, "If it is there, I must know it." She spent the night by the bed of a dried-up stream next to a stone arch that looked like a gate. At night, she thought she heard footsteps, steady, slow, approaching from the forest. She turned on the lantern, but there was no one around. Only the light sound of the wind and the same feeling that someone was watching. In the morning, she returned to the city with even more determination. From that moment on, her search became systematic. She created a map marking all the places where people had seen foggy shadows or heard singing. She sent a copy of this map to Sanderson. He wrote back briefly, "We missed something. I'm going back to the park." Anna did not know what he meant, but an entry appeared in her diary. "Every year the silence deepens, but I can still hear his footsteps." It seemed to her that the canyon was not just keeping a secret, it was waiting. And the one who once went there might still be there. Spring came late in the Rocky Mountains. Snow was still lying on the shadowy slopes, even in May, and only during the day did a light vapor of fog rise over the canyons. It was then that a group of ornithologists from the University of Colorado set out on another field expedition. Their goal was to monitor nesting bald eagles in the northern part of Black Bear Creek, 5 miles from where biologist Lucas Warren had once disappeared. This area was considered virtually inaccessible. Steep slopes, fallen trees, deep cracks in the ground that even experienced researchers found difficult to pass through. That's why tourists hardly ever visited the area. It was too wild, where the forest seemed primeval. The ornithologists were working under a grant that required annual checks of the nests of old pairs of eagles. The team was led by biology professor Thomas Clark, with a young researcher, Mark Delaney, in charge of the drone surveys. They worked in the morning of May 25th. The sky was overcast, the air thick and still, like before a thunderstorm. Clark was surveying the trees below, while Mark was flying the drone above the forest where the eagles were building their nests, massive structures of branches on top of old pine trees. On the tablet screen, the images changed quickly. Dark green crowns, stretches of rock, the glitter of streams. Suddenly, he noticed something strange. The nest at the top of the tree looked different from the rest. It seemed to be reinforced by foreign objects, light, irregular shapes that reflected sunlight. Mark zoomed in and realized that these were not just branches. On top of them were white fragments that looked like bones. He called the professor. The drone hovered over the nest, the camera transmitting images from a high altitude. Everything was clear. The eagle's nest, as big as a children's pool, was reinforced with small animal bones, including long vertebrae. But the main thing was that in the very center, as if specially placed, was a human skull. Clark could not immediately believe his eyes. He ordered the drone to lower and take a series of pictures from different angles. The camera recorded that the skull was intact, clean, without any tissue residue, and lying as flat as if it had been deliberately placed. Nearby were several shiny stones and a small object that stood out in dark color against the white branches. In the evening, when the team returned to base camp, they watched the video again. The image left no doubt. It was a human skull. The next morning, the professor reported the discovery to the Park Service. Rangers came along with forensic experts. It was difficult to get to the tree. They had to use climbing equipment. An experienced technician named David Johnson was the first to climb. His safety rope was shaking from the gusts of wind as he slowly reached the top of the pine. A few minutes later, his voice came over the radio, muffled by his breath. Confirmed. A human skull and something that looks like a wooden figure. The specialists carefully removed the find. The skull was perfectly cleaned, without any tissue residue, as if it had been processed or boiled. The lower jaw was partially preserved, with all the teeth intact. Experts immediately noticed that it could not be an ancient artifact. The structure of the bone indicated a modern origin. Nearby, in the nest, there were several smooth gray-white stones, similar to those found near stream beds in the lower part of the canyon. But the strangest thing of all was a small figure made of dark wood. It depicted a bird with disproportionately long legs and spread wings. The body was covered with scratches that resembled symbols or notches. Clark immediately recognized the resemblance to a description he had seen in the news a few years ago. Somewhere in the local newspaper, it had been mentioned that the wife of a missing biologist had found a similar wooden statue near where he had been camping. He felt a chill down his spine. Too many coincidences. The rangers fixed the place with coordinates and photographed every detail. The nest weighed almost 100 pounds and was so well fortified that it seemed to have been there for years. One of the ornithologists who studied the nest structure noted, "Eagles sometimes use animal bones, but never human bones. This is not normal." After the skull was removed, the area around the tree was searched for other remains, but nothing was found. No clothes, no fragments of fabric, no traces of parking. The skull seemed to have appeared there out of nowhere. Experts speculated that it could have been brought in by predators, perhaps coyotes or lynxes, which sometimes carry bones to their lairs. But then the question arose, how did a human skull end up on top of an old pine tree where even a bear could not climb? Forensic scientist Dr. Ray Wilson described it in his report as follows. The find appears to be deliberate placement. The positioning of the skull, the selection of elements, including minerals and the wooden figurine, are ritualistic in nature. The same day, the remains were taken to a laboratory in Denver. Everyone who saw the nest later recalled that it had a strange odor, not of death, but of old, weathered resin, mixed with something that looked like ash. Mark Delaney, who first noticed the discovery, could not sleep for several days. He told his colleagues that at night he dreamed of that skull, as if it was not lying on a tree, but looking down from the ground, among the branches growing down. A week later, the news of the gruesome discovery hit the local media. Reporters wrote about the skull in the eagle's nest and included old photos by Lucas Warren in the article. However, the authorities refrained from making any official statements until the results of the examination were available. For Anna Warren, this day was the moment when the past opened its doors again. She read a short report in the newspaper and immediately realized that somewhere in the mountains above the trees, they had finally found something that could give her an answer. But no one could have guessed that this skull would not be the end of the story, but only the beginning. The skull found in the eagle's nest was sent to a forensic laboratory in Denver. Experts worked with caution. The bone samples were in perfect condition, despite 5 years spent in the wild. The DNA analysis was compared with the data of relatives of the missing biologist Lucas Warren. A week later, the result confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to him. The identification was official. The Larimer County Police immediately reclassified the case from missing person to murder under unexplained circumstances. The investigation was resumed, this time under the supervision of the district attorney. Forensic medical examiner Dr. Ray Wilson noted in his report, "There are no blunt force traces or gunshot marks on the skull. However, there are a series of thin incisions on the back of the head, temples, and lower jaw, probably caused by a blade or other sharp instrument." According to him, such micronotches could have been formed either during the removal of soft tissue or after death as part of ritualistic actions. The cause of death could not be determined. There were no signs of violence that could unequivocally explain how Warren died. The examination also found a small amount of wax on the bottom of the skull, as if it had been held over a flame or fumigated with smoke. This fact further complicated the interpretation. Investigators began to consider various versions, from a simple murder to a ritual with elements of symbolism. The sheriff's official statement came out on June 22. He briefly told the press that Lucas Warren's death was being investigated as a suspected homicide. He did not comment on the motive or suspects. Anna Warren received a call the same evening and was asked to come to Denver to formally identify the deceased. She recognized the man from photographs of dental records, the contours of his jaw, the shape of his front teeth, a slightly crooked incisor. "Yes, that's him," she said, and found no more words. A new abyss of questions opened up for her. Why had someone lifted the skull into the tree? Who could have placed it among the branches in the heart of the nest? And most importantly, why was the same wooden bird figurine she had once held in her hands nearby? The investigation immediately checked everyone who could have been involved with Lucas: a former colleague with whom he had a scientific conflict, a local hunter who had once accused Lucas of scaring the beast away, several hermits who lived in the canyon area. However, none of the versions stood up to scrutiny. All had a confirmed alibi or were not even in Colorado at the time of the disappearance. Detectives examined old search reports, ranger reports, and satellite photos from those years. They tried to find at least a hint that could explain how the body ended up in an inaccessible part of the forest. Nothing. Only silence. No signs of a struggle, no remnants of clothing, no traces of dragging. The very idea that the skull had ended up on top of an old pine tree naturally seemed absurd. Eagles don't lift such objects into their nests, and no predator could have dragged a human skull to that height. A forensic anthropologist from the Department of Forensic Anthropology suggested that someone had deliberately placed the remains there, possibly using a rope or special equipment. "This is not the work of wildlife," he said. "A person acted here, and a person who knew what he was doing." Anna kept thinking that someone had been watching her search all these years. She remembered how in the summer of 2017 she spent the night by the stream and heard footsteps in the fog. At the time, she thought it was an animal. Now the doubt remained. Perhaps it was someone who already knew where the skull was. The police seized wood samples from the statuette found in the nest to compare with the one Anna had. Experts found that both were made of the same type of wood, dark aspen root, which does not grow in those places. Someone had brought it from another state. This only reinforced the feeling that the story had roots deeper than just one case of disappearance. But at the time, investigators did not know that they would find the answer, or a semblance of it, much closer than they thought. The investigation into Lucas Warren's case has moved into the stage of analyzing the archives. No new clues emerged, so the detectives decided to check out the old cases of disappearances in the Black Bear Creek Canyon area. In police logs from the last 5 decades, they found 3 unsolved cases that were similar to each other, almost to the point of detail. The first case dated back to the 70s. A man named Richard Lawson, a geologist who had come to the park to explore the rocks, disappeared. His tent and equipment were found near a stream 20 miles from the main road. Everything was there: a compass, a diary, food, even a thermos of warm tea. The body was never found. The second episode occurred in '81. An experienced hunter, Edward Moore, disappeared during a seasonal hunt. His dog returned alone, wounded, and frightened. In that year's report, there is a short paragraph that has long been overlooked. A local trapper reported seeing human-like figures in the fog, moving without lights and without sound. They didn't believe him, thinking he was drunk. The third case is from the early 90s. A young couple of tourists from Denver disappeared. They were experienced hikers, left the route to their friends, and disappeared in a section not far from the same tract. Their camp was found intact, with no signs of a struggle, but never the people. These three cases had one thing in common. All the missing people were heading to a remote part of Black Bear Creek, which has long been considered dangerous. The area was labeled on old maps as a restricted area, although no one had explained the official reason. Detectives turned to the University of Boulder archives, hoping to find historical references to the area. There, in an old newspaper from the early 20th century, they came across a short report headlined, "Disappearance of a Family of Settlers in the Mountains." The date was 1902. The article was about Silas Hawthorne, a New England settler who, together with his wife and 2 children, had settled in a cabin near a mountain stream. Neighbors recalled that he avoided people, did not go to church, and was often seen lighting fires on the slopes at night. He was considered a stranger, but he did no harm until the whole family disappeared in the spring. The search lasted 2 weeks. Foresters found only the remains of a cabin that had burned to the ground. The sheriff's report, which has been preserved in the archive, reads, "The cause of the fire has not been determined. No people were found. Several strangely shaped wooden objects, similar to animal figures, were found at the scene." After that, according to other newspaper reports, no one else settled in the area. A legend spread among the inhabitants that Silas Hawthorne worshipped the old gods of the mountains, spirits who, according to the beliefs of the old colonists, lived in the fog and took the souls of those who went too deep into the forest. Anna Warren accidentally came across this article when she was helping detectives review microfilm. She read it several times, paying attention to the recurring details: the stream, the fog, the wooden figures. All of this coincided with the findings concerning Lucas. That evening, she went to the local history museum in Estes Park. There, in a display case, among the artifacts from the time of the first colonists, was an old wooden statue of a bird with long legs. The sign underneath read, "Hawthorne Family Mascot," found near the site of a fire in 1902. Anna stood in front of the glass for several minutes, not moving. The figure was identical to the one she had found 3 years ago near her husband's camp. She took a picture of the exhibit and sent it to the detective. In response, she received a short message. "This cannot be a coincidence. We are preparing a request to the county archives." The next day, the police officially added the old Hawthorne family files to the case. Among the yellowed pages were several testimonies from residents who said that the night after the fire, they heard a humming sound, like singing or moaning, coming from the mountains. They believed it was the Hawthorne souls wandering in the fog, looking for a way out. For the detectives, it was just a story, but for Anna, it was another clue. She felt that the past not only echoed her tragedy, it repeated it. When she was returning from the museum, the evening fog was already gathering over the mountains. The road was lost among the trees, and in the distance, in the direction of Black Bear Creek, a thick white veil hung. Anna stared at it and thought that perhaps Silas Hawthorne and her husband were part of the same story, one that the forest would not let go of. After studying old archives, the police brought in an anthropologist from the University of Denver, Dr. Harvey Lang, to investigate the case. He was given access to all the seized items: 2 wooden bird figurines found near Lucas Warren's camp and in an eagle's nest, as well as a museum piece that belonged to the Hawthorne family. Lang began by analyzing the carvings in detail. He found that all 3 objects were made of the same type of wood, a dark aspen root that does not grow in Colorado. This meant that someone had brought the material from elsewhere. Microscopic marks on the surface showed that the figures were not made with modern tools, but with a knife or flint chisel. At a scientific meeting, Lang proposed a hypothesis that stunned even experienced investigators. He suggested that the bird depicted with unnaturally long legs is the swamp harrier, a symbol of ancient hunting tribes who believed it to be a guide of souls to the underworld. In ancient beliefs, this bird connected the earth and death, and its image was left where sacrifices were made. When the detectives mapped all the disappearances over the past half-century and the points where they found similar statuettes, they noticed a strange pattern. They all formed a clear circle with a radius of about 10 miles. In the center was a swampy area where even experienced hunters did not venture. The locals called this part of the forest simply the abyss. Satellite imagery showed that thick fogs lingered there even in the heat of the day, and the temperature was lower than in the rest of the park. The detectives decided to inspect the area from the air using drones with thermal imagers. On August 30th, the drones flew over the swamp for the first time. The cameras captured something strange. Under the roots of a huge tree that looked like an old pine tree, a depression with an abnormal temperature was visible. The thermal image showed several small spots moving inside. They did not match the characteristics of any known animal. The next day, a special detachment of detectives and rangers was formed, equipped with weapons and night vision cameras. The route was difficult: dense thickets, mud, and a drop in temperature. The fog did not dissipate even during the day. When the group got to the epicenter of the circle, they saw a picture that resembled a nightmare. The area was dotted with structures made of branches, like huge nests up to 2 meters high. Some of them were empty, others half filled with moss and animal bones. The air was heavy, saturated with the damp smell of rotten wood. At the foot of the largest tree, we found the entrance to the cave. The roots went down, forming an arch, behind which a hole was black. Inside, the temperature was much higher than outside, as if a fire had recently been lit there. The first to enter was Senior Ranger Alan Moore. He moved slowly, shining his flashlight along the walls. A few steps after entering, the floor leveled out, and a small cavity opened up in front of him. There were rough wooden frames covered with animal skins, like primitive beds. On the stone ledges were dried herbs, clay vessels, and bones tied with ropes. In the very center of the cave was a stone that looked like a natural altar. On it were dozens of wooden statuettes, exact copies of those seen earlier. Between them were metal objects, old credit cards, rings, watch fragments. Everything looked like a kind of collection brought as a gift. At the foot of the stone, the detectives found another gruesome discovery: a human skull, an old one covered with a thin layer of soot. Next to it was a dried branch with a fragment of a bird feather attached to its end. A police photographer captured every detail, and then the investigation team examined the rest of the cave. There were no signs of recent human activity, but fresh coals in the fireplace indicated that someone had been there recently. It seemed that the cave's inhabitants had left when they sensed danger. The detectives left the place with the feeling that they had entered not just a hermit's home, but a center of an ancient cult that has survived to this day. It seemed to them that they were being watched through the fog, silently, patiently, from the height of the trees. As they were returning to the base, a short message came over the radio from the technician who had been monitoring the drones. The heat anomaly is moving, not just 1, 2, maybe 3. The connection was cut off. October 2018. After discovering the cave, police and anthropologists began excavations in the area around it. The work lasted a week. The soil was heavy, saturated with moisture, and the roots of old trees intertwined underfoot, forming a natural trap for any traces. At a depth of several feet from the surface, the archaeologists came across a burial site, small but carefully arranged. It contained the remains of at least 4 people. A forensic examination confirmed that these were bones that were more than a century old. DNA analysis and comparison with archival data led to an incredible conclusion. The remains belonged to Silas Hawthorne, his wife and children, the same settlers who disappeared at the beginning of the last century. But the way they died made even experienced experts stop. The Hawthorne skulls had the same deep, thin incisions as Lucas Warren's skull. the same pattern, the same traces of a blade that moved precisely and with the same force. It seemed that not 100 years, but a few days had passed between these deaths. Anthropologist Harvey Lang noted in his report, "We are not dealing with a single act of violence, but with the reenactment of a ritual that has been passed down for generations. This is not imitation, this is continuity." From that moment on, the investigation took on a completely different dimension. The version of random murders disappeared. The detectives started talking about a cult, a closed group or family that could live in seclusion for decades, maintaining an ancient rite. Their goal could be to pacify the spirits of the mountains or to offer gifts in the form of human sacrifice. Formally, the investigation continued, but everyone realized that it was almost impossible to find those behind it. The territory of Black Bear Creek stretched for dozens of miles, and even modern technology could not fully comb through this maze of gorges and mountain streams. The people who lived there, if they existed at all, knew every ravine, every trail. They could see the investigators without being seen themselves. Several surveillance cameras were left at the site of the cave, but a few days later, one by one, they stopped transmitting. When the rangers returned, the equipment was damaged, as if it had been smashed by stones. No traces of outsiders were found. The case of Lucas Warren remained officially open, although the investigative reports no longer had any prospects. The sheriff said in his final comment, "We didn't find the killers, but we did find a story that's older than all our maps." Anna Warren waited until the investigation was complete. She took the skull of the man who had been waiting for his burial for so many years. In mid-October, she organized a small ceremony at the Boulder Cemetery. Only a few close friends and 2 former rangers who had helped with the search were present. During the ceremony, Anna did not say a word. She stood by the grave holding a copy of the same wooden bird figurine. After the burial, she left it on the tombstone as a memory, but also as a warning. She hasn't returned to Black Bear Creek since. But sometimes, when she woke up in the middle of the night, she remembered a sound, a soft rustling sound, like wings that she had heard in the mountains when she was looking for Lucas. Now this sound seemed to her to be no accident. Over time, the police received several more anonymous reports of strange flashes of light in the swamp area and of singing coming from the forest at night. All of the visits yielded nothing. Each time the investigators arrived, the fog was so thick that even a flashlight could not penetrate it more than a few feet. Anna tried to go on with her life, but the feeling of presence did not leave her. She wrote in her diary, "The horror is not that he is dead. The horror is that the forest remembers." It seemed to her that as soon as she opened the window on a quiet night, a familiar cold wind would blow from somewhere in the mountains, bringing with it the same hum, deep and even as the breath of the old earth. The Rocky Mountains plunged back into the autumn silence. The fog descended from the peaks and descended to the valleys, covering the canyons with a silent blanket. And somewhere out there, among the disfigured trees and rotten grass, something continued to live. Something older than people and remembering every sacrifice made. Anna Warren buried her husband, but she could not bury her fear, because the shadow over Black Bear Creek did not dissipate. It just went deeper into the fog and waited.